Okay, so we are in the Inav ports tab and we're going to be doing some ports configurations right here. Now, first and foremost, you will see UART1, which is generally for your USB. I will leave it enabled. So you see data here. Data is more for communications between the flight controller and the computer or the flight controller configurator. So I'll leave UART1, which is most likely my USB, most likely, maybe. I'm not too sure about this one specifically because I'm using a flight controller that's usually or out of the box comes with Betaflight, and I just converted it into an iNav flight controller so I can have like much more accessibility to different functions. So I know for UART2, UART2 is the Bluetooth. So I'm going to leave UART2 enabled because this flight controller comes with Bluetooth capabilities on board. So I can connect my Android device and my Android flight controller configurator to my flight controller via Bluetooth. Now I know that UART3, the way I actually sorted my accessories or my peripherals onto my flight controller, UART3 is the trump wire that goes from the VTX to the T3 on the board. So T3 here, I will enable it right here and put it right here as trump. So IRC trump. And the reason why, if you have not seen my beta flight videos or you are just using iNav and have never used any other flight configurator, what's going to happen is I'm going to explain that to you. So the reason why I have IRC trump here, if you have not seen it in your manual, is because my VTX uses the trump protocol. It does not have a receiver wire that goes from the, well, as a receiver pin that comes from the flight controller. Basically I have the T wire, which is a transmission wire, and it goes directly onto the board. So generally R goes to T when connecting your peripherals to your flight controller. And since I don't have a transmitter wire, I only have a T connection on the board. It's going to be only the peripherals I'm going to enable. For example, if you have a receiver uses usually both the T and the R, which is the RX and the TX, where the RX goes to the TX on the flight controller and the TX from that receiver goes to the RX on the flight controller. Once you have those two, that make a pair, and that here is where you're going to enable serial RX right here. So for UART6, I'm going to enable serial RX because this is where I have my receiver connected to on my board. It is connected to R6 and T6 together, and that means it's connected to UART6 using serial RX. If you have an accessory that only uses just the trump wire, the transmission on the flight controller, which is for example T4, T5, T6 and so on, then it only have to be enabled via the peripheral right here, for example GPS, or if you want to use TBS smart audios for your VTX and so on. So data here is only used for communicating to the flight controller, and that should be via different methods like Bluetooth or USB, or if you have a Wi-Fi connector, something like that. Those here are always going to be auto. Serial RX is if you have both a receiver and a transmission wire going to that peripheral and to that board together. So like T3 and T4 goes exactly from the flight controller to exactly one peripheral, then that is it right here. If you have sensors here, then you're going to use sensors here and you're going to choose exactly what it is. You're going to choose what kind of sensor it is. So let's say I have a sensor on T4 and I call it the GPS. Let's say I have a GPS installed. I'm going to enable the GPS here. I'm going to leave that same baud rate, and then I'm going to select whichever one I'm going to be using here. Now, sometimes if needs be, you do not need to select the peripheral here. You just select the sensor So I believe you just click the sensor right here. I've never used a GPS on Inav, neither Better Flight, but at the end of the day, there's always manuals that comes with the installation of it. I'm going to now click Save and Reboot. So now, with that saved and reboot, I can now go to the configurations tab right here, and you can see every single thing that's available for configuring. Now I'm just going to go through it briefly because this is just the ports on the configuration tabs all together, and it's going to be like the most simplest video that you can actually get, most likely. So here we have the accelerometer, and we have IMC accelerometer chip, so we're going to leave it like that. So I'm not sure if you're using that one or using that one, but I can clearly see that my accelerometer here is enabled. So that means yes, the accelerometer should work because I also saw my drone moving left and right and side by side on the status right here. Magnometer, I don't have a magnometer, but those are the ones available. Magnometer is used for your compass. I have a barometer, and I have to get those information by going to the CLI, so I will do so. In the CLI, I'll type in status, and here I can see my IMC, my accelerometer, my barrows. My barrow right now is DPS 310 and so on. This is my gyro right here. I'm going to leave it like that. So back in the configurations tab, I have DPS 310 for my barrow, and you can get that information even before you flash your drone with your CLI from Inav. So I don't have any of those sensors right here, and I'm going to leave that exactly how it is. You have all the features here, so you can enable CPU based serial ports. You don't need that. We don't have GPS. We can enable telemetry output because we need connection from our transmitter to our receiver. So that here we're going to leave RSSI input turned off for our analog signal, but if needs be, we can always check out the information here and then check it out. It basically measures the signal strength, and that's generally it. So we have reversible motor modes for reversible ESCs. We do not need that, but if you want to reverse your motors, then therefore you can use that, because our ESC, the motors can be reversed. And here we have multicolor RGB lights, so red, green, and blue lights, and we do not need that because we don't have an LED strip. But just one extra thing, for reversible motor modes, you can also have it enabled, so you can go to your mixer and reverse your motors without any issues also. But for now, I'm gonna leave it like that. So OLED screen display, we do not have one. We have black box, but we do not have a SD card in it, but we can leave it enabled, and I think I'll enable that also. So everything right here, you can see OSD. We need OSD from our VTX, well, from our camera to see it on the goggles or see it on the screen that we're watching. So we're going to have OSD turned on. Permanently enable air mode, which is generally, I don't want to permanently enable it. I want to have it optional between air and between horizon mode. But if you want to have only air mode and never switch to horizon by mistake, then therefore you can do that to permanently enable it. We don't have wings, we have a quadcopter, so we're going to skip that here. But that's launch mode for fixed wings. And here you're gonna see different options you can actually enable or disable if you would like. So here we can see the voltages of our battery, and it better you go online and get a good understanding of how to calibrate your battery instead of going through this. So we're not going to be calibrating any batteries here, and that's the battery settings here. so you can get to a good understanding as to your max voltage of your battery when it's fully charged. I did that in Betaflight in the last tutorial, but for battery calibration, it's very easy. All you have to do is watch a video online, and that's generally it, and you're good to go with this. Here you have VTX also, and this is where you configure your VTX. Now we don't have any VTX tables. You can see the band right here. We have the race band, which is R. You can choose your channel. You can choose your power levels here. We have 5 power levels maximum on this VTX. And here you can choose your channel, and you can use low power while the aircraft is disarmed, so it's called low power disarm, just like Betaflight. When your drone is not armed and the propellers are turned off, generally it uses really low VTX power. So you have serial gimbal here. We're going to skip that. We're not going to be using a gimbal and head tracker. We can enable head tracker from our goggles onto our system if we have head tracker available. So here you can use serial head tracker if it's in the system, or use MSP protocol. So for now, we're just going to press save and reboot. And that's it for the configurations and ports.